What's up, like Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of the White Lotus Season 3 out in full now on HBO. The White Lotus, of course, at this point, as everyone knows, is one of the biggest shows in HBO history, and one of the shows that's close as we can get nowadays to a monocultural show that everyone's watching, everyone's paying attention to and talking about. And Season 3 has had a lot of discussion about it, specifically comparisons to the past two seasons of the anthology series and what this show is doing similarly and also different from the past season, and obviously people comparing the quality and things like that. And I think what's really kind of become clear with season 3 is that there's a lot of people that watch this show and get super into the theorizing and the mystery element. Of course, the White Lotus has introduced a body, or in this case, just introducing a lot of expected death when we hear the gunfire with season 3's start. The White Lotus is always presenting that at the beginning of each season. We're always working towards that. Now, for me, I've never really focused on the mystery of that. I feel like, especially with seasons 1 and 2, the strengths of the show and the core appeal of the show has been above finding out who actually died, who actually committed the crime, etc. For me, the core appeal of the White Lotus is seeing characters change and also seeing those characters realize that they've changed. That is always a lot more satisfying to me than figuring out the reveal of who actually died or committed the crime at the end of the season. The White Lotus Season 3 is certainly a lot more of a contemplative and existential season than the past two were, but I still think it was a quality season. A great ensemble cast, excellent writing from Mike White, the appeal of it being a travel show, excellent meme content from Parker Posey and others. While I do think it was a good season of TV overall, there are certain character arcs that are less successful than others. Some stuff felt a bit too thin or dragged out, and then other stuff could have used extra scenes to actually deepen it. So again, not a perfect season, but the show is operating at such a high level that even if you have these nitpicks about it, it's still a really enjoyable time. And I'm looking forward to seeing where season 4 takes us. Reflecting on the season overall, structure wise, you probably got less interaction between all the core groups than you would have expected. I guess if you just think about what those groups were, of course you have the Ratliff family, you have the trio of Leslie Bibb, Carrie Coon, and Michelle Monaghan's characters, you have Belinda and her son, and you have Rick and Chelsea. And Chelsea interacts with a lot of the groups, but yeah, overall it didn't feel super connected. Of course, I'm leaving out Guy Talk and Mook as well. But yeah, just kind of going through arcs and payoffs. I think Tim Ratliff, I think Jason Isaacs does a great performance with this because he has to really switch up what he's doing once he has to play a drugged out version of the character once he just starts abusing his wife's lorazepam. But the thing with the Tim Ratliff character is he's kind of in stasis, in one place, headspace wise, for most of the season, right? And he has that scene with the monk, which I thought was really great. But he never has any core scene about him coming to grips with what's happened with any of the family, right? In the penultimate episode, he doesn't tell Saxon what's going on when Saxon checks in once again. And you get that scene on the boat where he, talks about the family and stuff. But I just felt like we could have used a little bit more with him, I think thankfully Victoria, Parker Posey's character, was such a satisfying watch just because of the kind of instant classicness of her performance on the show. Just the line delivery, obviously all the memes, Buddhism, tsunami, Taiwan, just the inflections that she gives, right? I think if you're picking one performer on the show to win an Emmy for this season, of course there'll be tons of nominations, as we know. I think you have to go with Posey, which is, I think, a great compliment considering this is a season that also features Carrie Coon. And, I have to give the show a lot of credit, though, because Patrick Schwarzenegger's Saxon, I think, is actually one of the more satisfying characters on the show, even if I could have used an extra scene or two to really bring that home. But his kind of enlightenment in his, meathead, silver spoon kind of way actually was pretty satisfying. However, the Piper stuff is certainly the best, right? Where she kind of realizes that her own, wishes to leave behind her wealthy family, she realizes that she can't give up all those comforts. And all it takes is one night in a monastery to come to that realization. And I think that was a really satisfying one. Similarly, Belinda, when she gets all the money from Greg/Gary, Belinda realizing she's selling out and also kind of becoming like the new Tanya, leaving her erstwhile new man behind once he actually gets some means and, new stage on life. I thought her arc was actually pretty satisfying as well. Walton Goggins as Rick, I think the performance is really good. His quest though to like feel peace after everything with his past, going to Bangkok, meeting up with Sam Rockwell's character, and on this quest to kill who he thinks killed his dad, which we actually learned was in fact his dad, played by Scott Glenn. That like I liked his character, like being his character and just his shitty attitude most of the time. I just don't know if it fully paid off in a way I would like. I think Amy Lou Wood as Chelsea was really great. I loved her on Sex Education. Happy to see her get more eyes on her with this. She did great on the show. But yeah, I think the Rick stuff is fine. I think Sam Rockwell really helps carry a lot of that, just because once he first shows up and gives an iconic monologue like he does, then he actually sticks around longer than you'd expect during Rick's trip in Bangkok. I think that really helps a lot, just because Rockwell is just so hilarious and so committed to the absurdity of his character. I did like Carrie Coon's Lori as well, kind of coming to terms that she is selling out willingly for this kind of shallow skeleton of a friendship that she realizes she wants to keep, even though it's not completely fulfilling. And I think what was so fascinating about that scene was that Leslie Bibb and Michelle Monaghan's characters basically give her nothing in return in that episode, or in that scene at dinner. I think the thing was the Russian guys was fine. They're fun. Also I think Guy Talk as a character, who I think I largely disliked almost the entire time, just because he's, I think, just inherently unlikable as this guy who's both super unconfident and unsure of himself, but also makes lots of like mistakes that affect others as well. Just not like the coolest cat to be around. Him selling out as well in the end, you know, decides to in fact kill the guy, as a result getting the girl, and then becoming the security guard after all, even though he completely fucked up in the beginning of the season, resulting in the robbery by the Russians. Him, I think like it's a fine, neat enough resolution. I think it works because you know that he is in touch with himself enough to understand that he's like going against his actual beliefs to sell out here. But I didn't love being with Guy Talk enough, so I don't really care about the resolution per se. You know, would you murder Walton Goggins to be with Lisa? It's a hard choice, but we understand why Guy Talk did what he did. I did enjoy Belinda's son Zion in the finale when they're negotiating with Greg Gary, asking for the $5 million. I thought he went like off the top rope to seal the deal, and Belinda, selling it as well. A surprise to us. Intentionally leaving and acting flustered. I enjoyed all that. Ki Kwan voice cameo in the beginning once Tim understands the direness of his professional and financial situation back home. Of course, there's all the stuff with Saxon and Lachlan and what they did and didn't do together. I think this stuff with Lachlan is like somewhat curious, in the beginning, but then they actually kind of pay it off in the finale by him just openly admitting and acknowledging that he's a people pleaser, right? And that was his line of thinking. And then you contrast it with Saxon just being so disturbed by the situation and how it almost led to Lachlan killing himself with his dad's leftover poison blender juice, right? It's not a bad season of TV. I thought it was still quite good. I enjoyed watching the show the entire time. Great performances throughout, thematically pretty consistent and solid compared to expectations. But again, like mystery wise, I don't think there was too much mystery. Going into the finale for me, it was pretty clear that Walton Goggins was going to be involved in some of the shooting, and someone was probably going to end up getting poisoned inadvertently. It was just a matter of who that was going to be, right? There's a lot of red herrings about, is Greg Gary going to kill Belinda? And that ends up not being the case at all. And we get that revealed to us early on. So yeah, I mean, like, do I like season 1, season 2 more than season 3? Of course I do. This is going to happen in an anthology series. It happens to all of them. Look at another high-level series about to come back, like Black Mirror. Same thing. It's going to have ups and downs. But then the core appeal and formula of what the White Lotus tries to do, putting us in a place, giving us all these characters, having them interact, and having them figure out what's happened to them, and realizing their own flaws, and perhaps making changes often for the worse. that's still appealing and that's still going to keep working. And we know White Lotus season 4 will come into existence quite soon. HBO wants to be in the Mike White like Lotus business. He's the only director of the show, only lead director anyway. There's no writer's room. He's the sole writer. Even though it's an expensive show to make, they, I think it's not the most expensive show they make. Right, all the cast works for scale to be on this show, which I think is a pretty fair trade off considering get all the visibility of being on the flagship HBO show of the time. Of course, that wasn't the case for everyone, right? Reportedly, Woody Harrelson turned down the Walton Goggins role in this season because he didn't want to work for scale. That being said, we'll hear news about a season 4 pretty darn soon, you'd have to imagine, and I'm looking forward to it all the same. Let me know, though, what did you like most about The White Lotus Season 3? What are your favorite things? What are your hang-ups? Let me know. And for more TV reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.